I never thought a simple doctor's visit would change everything. But when he handed me that prescription, my heart nearly stopped, because beneath the list of medicines was his phone number, and a note that made my stomach twist. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly gesture. But deep down I knew better. My doctor wasn't just being nice. He was inviting me into something dangerous. I had always been the responsible one, the woman who planned everything, followed the rules, and never crossed the lines that shouldn't be crossed. My life was predictable, steady. I had a good job in marketing, a loving, stable fiancé named Jake, and a routine that kept me grounded. Every morning, I woke up, made coffee, kissed Jake goodbye as he left for work, and carried on with my day like clockwork. We weren't the passionate, can't keep our hands off each other kind of couple. But we were solid, dependable. And that was supposed to be enough, right? I had been feeling off for a few days. Nothing major, just a lingering headache, a slight dizziness that wouldn't go away. Jake told me it was just stress. "You work too much, babe," he had said with a distracted smile, barely looking up from his phone. "Just get some rest." But something told me it wasn't just stress. So I decided to go to the clinic for a quick checkup, thinking it would be nothing more than a routine visit. I had no idea that stepping into that doctor's office would lead me down a path I never saw coming. The clinic was small, nothing fancy. The waiting rooms smelled like antiseptic and old magazines, and I had to sit for nearly an hour before they finally called my name. "Miss Carter?" I stood up, smoothing down my blouse, and followed the nurse to a small examination room. She took my vitals, asked me a few questions, then told me the doctor would be in shortly. I expected some old, gray-haired physician with tired eyes and a rushed demeanor. Instead, when the door opened, Dr. Ethan Wallace stepped inside, and my world tilted slightly on its axis. He wasn't what I expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and when he smiled at me, something unfamiliar twisted in my stomach. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth, professional. "What brings you in today?" I swallowed hard, suddenly forgetting why I was even there. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about my symptoms anymore. I was thinking about him, and that was the first sign of trouble. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment, a natural reaction to an attractive man who just so happened to be my doctor. But as I sat there, watching Dr. Ethan Wallace move around the small examination room, I couldn't shake the way my body responded to him. The way my pulse quickened when his eyes met mine, the way his voice sent an unfamiliar warmth through me. "You mentioned dizziness and headaches?" His voice was smooth, steady, the kind that commanded attention without trying. I nodded quickly, trying to push aside whatever strange thing was happening inside me. "Yeah, it's been a few days. I thought maybe it was just stress, but it's not really going away." He nodded, taking his stethoscope and stepping closer. "Let's take a look." I expected the examination to be quick, impersonal. Just a few routine checks before he sent me on my way with instructions to drink more water and get some rest. But the moment his fingers brushed against my wrist, checking my pulse, I felt it again, that sharp, electric awareness. His hands were warm, firm but gentle. Deep breath in, he instructed as he placed the cold diaphragm of the stethoscope against my chest. I obeyed, my breath hitching slightly, and for a second, I swore I saw something flicker in his expression. Something interested. No, I was imagining it. I had to be. "You seem healthy overall," he finally said, straightening. "Probably just mild dehydration or fatigue. I'll write you a prescription for some basic vitamins and a mild pain reliever, but you should be fine with rest." He moved to his desk, scribbling something on a pad. I took the opportunity to exhale, forcing myself to shake off the ridiculous reaction I was having to him. But then, he hesitated. For the first time during the appointment, he seemed unsure. Then, with careful movements, he tore off the prescription, folded it in half, and held it out to me. Our fingers brushed as I took it. "Make sure to take care of yourself, Miss Carter," he said softly, his voice holding something I couldn't quite name. I nodded quickly. "Thanks, doctor." I turned to leave, eager to escape before I embarrassed myself any further, but as I walked out of the clinic, something nagged at me. The way he hesitated. The way his gaze lingered just a moment too long. It wasn't until I got home, tossing my purse on the counter and pulling out the folded paper, that I realized why my instincts had been screaming at me. Because beneath the prescription for vitamins and pain relievers was his phone number. And a note. "If you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to call." I stared at it, my heart pounding, my breath caught in my throat. This was a joke, right? A mistake? Doctors didn't do this. I was engaged. I should throw it away. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself tracing the ink with my fingers, my mind running in dangerous directions. I told myself I wouldn't call. I told myself it was just a friendly gesture. I told myself this was nothing. And yet, I slipped the note into the drawer by my bedside, just in case. Because deep down I already knew. This was the beginning of something I shouldn't want. And I had no idea how to stop it. I told myself it was nothing. Just a fleeting moment of attraction, a natural response to a good-looking man who happened to be my doctor. But as I sat there, watching Dr. Ethan Wallace move around the small examination room, I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted. My pulse quickened when his eyes met mine, my skin tingled where his fingers lightly brushed against my wrist while checking my pulse, and my breath hitched slightly when the cool diaphragm of his stethoscope pressed against my chest. His voice was deep yet calm, controlled, and yet I swore I heard something softer beneath the professionalism, something that made me wonder if I was imagining things. "You seem healthy overall," he finally said, straightening up after the examination. "Probably just mild dehydration or fatigue. I'll write you a prescription for some basic vitamins and a mild pain reliever. But you should be fine with rest." His words were routine, but something about the way he hesitated while writing the prescription made my stomach tighten. He seemed to pause for just a second too long before tearing off the slip of paper. As he handed it to me, our fingers brushed, sending an inexplicable jolt up my arm. "Make sure to take care of yourself, Miss Carter," he said, his voice quieter than before. I nodded quickly, forcing a polite smile as I grabbed my purse and hurried out. But even as I walked down the street toward my apartment, something felt off. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, or the tension I thought I had imagined in the small space between us. It was something else. And when I finally got home and unfolded the prescription, I realized exactly what it was. Beneath the medication instructions, written in unmistakably neat handwriting, was his phone number. And a note. "If you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to call." My heart pounded as I stared at it. This had to be a mistake. Maybe he wrote it absent-mindedly, or maybe it was just a professional courtesy, nothing more. But deep down I knew better. Doctors didn't do this. They didn't hand out their personal numbers to patients. And they certainly didn't write notes that felt like an invitation. I should throw it away. I should laugh it off, tell myself I was reading too much into it. I was engaged. I had Jake, a man who was steady and safe, who would never cross a line like this. But I didn't throw it away. Instead, I carefully folded the paper again and slipped it into the drawer of my bedside table. Just in case. Because even though I told myself I would never call, even though I told myself it was nothing, I already knew the truth. This was the beginning of something I shouldn't want. And I had no idea how to stop it. For days I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, in routines, in Jake. I told myself that the note meant nothing, that Dr. Ethan Wallace was simply being friendly, that I was reading too much into things. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling. The weight of that small, folded piece of paper in my bedside drawer seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Every night, I would lie in bed beside Jake, staring at the ceiling, feeling more restless than I had in years. Jake was a good man, a steady presence in my life. But lately he had felt distant. He was always tired, always distracted, always assuming I was fine without ever really asking. I knew he loved me, but it had been a long time since I had felt truly seen. And maybe that's why, on the 5th night after my appointment, I found myself reaching for the note. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning over the simple yet dangerous words once more. I shouldn't. I knew that. But before I could stop myself, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hello." His voice was calm, warm, familiar in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, my breath caught in my throat. What was I even doing? "Hi, Dr. Wallace. It's, Natalie Carter. From the clinic." My voice sounded unsure, small. A pause. Then a quiet chuckle. "I was wondering if you'd actually call," he admitted. "I wasn't sure you noticed the note." I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the phone. "I noticed." My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it through the receiver. "Good," he murmured. "I meant it, you know. If you ever need anything, I'm here." There was something about the way he said it that made my skin heat. A promise hidden beneath the words. An opening I should not step through. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. What was I supposed to say? That I couldn't stop thinking about him? That for the first time in a long time I felt awake? That when I looked at my fiancé, I no longer felt that spark but a slow-burning doubt? "Do you want to meet?" he asked, cutting through my chaotic thoughts. My stomach flipped. "Meet? Not at the clinic," he clarified, his voice smooth, unreadable. "Somewhere else. Somewhere neutral." This was the moment I could stop. I could laugh it off, tell him that I had called by mistake, and pretend like none of this had ever happened. But instead, I found myself whispering the word that would change everything. Okay. 2 nights later, I found myself sitting in the corner of a dimly lit cafe, my hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup of tea as I waited. My nerves were on fire. I had told Jake I was working late, and I hated how easily the lie had slipped from my lips. But sitting here, waiting for him, it didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. It felt like I was doing something inevitable. When Ethan finally walked through the door, my breath caught. He wasn't in his usual clinic attire. He wore a fitted dark button-up with the sleeves casually rolled to his elbows, and it was impossible not to notice how effortlessly attractive he was outside of that sterile white coat. His eyes found mine immediately, and the small smile that curled on his lips sent a dangerous thrill through me. "You actually came," he said as he slid into the seat across from me. "I told myself I wouldn't," I admitted, forcing a nervous laugh. "But here I am." "Here you are," he echoed, his gaze steady, unwavering. There was a tension between us, thick and unspoken. This wasn't a casual meeting, and we both knew it. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that sent heat curling through my veins. "Tell me why you called, Natalie," he said softly, leaning forward just slightly. I opened my mouth, ready to say something safe, something that wouldn't pull me deeper into this. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself staring at his lips, at the way his fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup absent-mindedly, at the undeniable way my body reacted to him. "I don't know," I finally whispered. I can't stop thinking about you." There. I had said it. The truth, raw and exposed between us. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something dark, something hungry. "Neither can I," he admitted. For a moment, the world around us disappeared. The noise of the cafe, the distant chatter of other people. It all faded into the background. All that existed was him, the weight of his gaze, the slow, knowing smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth. This was a mistake. A beautiful, dangerous, irresistible mistake. And I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't strong enough to walk away. The cafe meeting was supposed to be harmless. A conversation. A moment of stolen curiosity that would fade once I saw him again, once I faced the reality of my choices. But it didn't fade. If anything, it became something heavier, something that followed me home, wrapped around my thoughts and refused to let go. That night, as I lay beside Jake, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I felt the full weight of my betrayal. Not because I had done anything yet, but because I wanted to. I should have deleted his number. I should have let that meeting be the end of it. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself texting Ethan the next day. One message. A simple, "I can't stop thinking about last night." I hovered over the send button, my pulse racing, and before I could stop myself, I tapped it. The response came quicker than I expected. "Then don't stop." A shiver ran through me. The next few weeks became a dangerous game. It started with texts, small messages exchanged at odd hours of the night. Inside jokes. Subtle flirtation. Hints of something neither of us had the courage to say outright. Then the messages turned into calls, long, late-night conversations where we talked about everything and nothing at all. I told him about the things that made me restless, about how I sometimes felt like I was living a life that didn't quite fit me anymore. He listened in a way Jake hadn't in years, responding with words that made my chest ache. "You deserve to be happy, Natalie," Ethan had said one night, his voice low and warm through the receiver. "Are you?" I had no answer. And then, the texts turned into meetings. They were always secretive, always calculated. A late lunch here, an excuse to be in the same grocery store at the same time, a walk in the park where we pretended to be just two acquaintances catching up. But there was nothing innocent about those meetings. Every time, the space between us grew smaller. Every accidental brush of our fingers felt heavier. Every stolen glance, every pause in our conversations where we both knew what we wanted but refused to speak it aloud, it all built into something unbearable. And then one night I let it happen. Jake was out of town for the weekend, visiting his family. I had told him I was too busy with work to join him, and he hadn't questioned it. He never did. That night when Ethan texted me, "Can I see you?" I knew exactly what I was agreeing to. There was no illusion anymore. No pretense. I met him at his apartment. The moment I walked through the door, I felt the electricity between us snap like a live wire. We didn't speak at first, there was nothing left to say. The tension that had been simmering between us for weeks finally cracked open, and suddenly, his hands were on me. Firm. Certain. Unapologetic. His lips crashed against mine in a way that made my knees weak, and I let him. I let myself sink into the feeling of something forbidden, something that tasted like relief and fire all at once. Tell me you want this, he whispered against my skin. I do, I breathed. And then there was no turning back. I should have felt guilty. The next morning, as I lay tangled in Ethan's sheets, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing beside me, I should have been filled with regret. But all I felt was calm. Like, for the first time in months, I was exactly where I was meant to be. I turned onto my side, studying him as the morning light spilled through the window. He looked different like this, more vulnerable, more real. And I hated how much I wanted this moment to last. But reality was never kind enough to let stolen moments stretch forever. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it lazily, expecting a message from a friend or a random notification. But the moment I saw the screen, my stomach dropped. Jake just landed early. Can't wait to see you, babe. Panic shot through me like ice water. I sat up too quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. What's wrong? Ethan asked, his voice still groggy from sleep. I have to go, I whispered, my fingers shaking as I scrambled for my clothes. He sat up too, frowning. Natalie. I can't, I have to go, I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. I didn't look at him as I rushed out the door. I couldn't. The entire drive home was a blur. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more panicked than the last. What had I done? What was I doing? I pulled into the driveway just as Jake's car turned onto our street. My hands were still shaking as I forced a smile, stepping out of my car just in time for him to wrap his arms around me. Missed you, he murmured against my hair. I swallowed hard. Missed you too. Lie. As he pulled back, his eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought, he knows. He can tell. But then his smile returned, easy and unbothered, and I realized he had no idea. And that was worse. But secrets never stay hidden forever. Days passed. Then weeks. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend like nothing had changed. But I wasn't the same. I flinched when Jake touched me. I avoided his eyes at dinner. I stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped reaching for his hand. Because I didn't love him anymore. Because a part of me was still tangled up in white sheets, in stolen moments, in a man who was never supposed to be mine. And then the inevitable happened. One night, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Jake's voice cut through the silence behind me. Who's Ethan? The plate slipped from my hands, shattering in the sink. My entire body went cold. Slowly, I turned around, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own voice as I whispered, What? He held up my phone, the screen glowing with a name I had foolishly never deleted. Dr. Ethan Wallace. One missed call. Jake's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the phone. Who the hell is Ethan? My world imploded in a single moment. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears as I stared at Jake, his face dark with confusion and something else, something raw. Suspicion. I could feel the weight of my betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force, suffocating, unbearable. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Who is Ethan? Jake repeated, his voice tighter now, more clipped, controlled in the way that made it even more terrifying. I could have lied. I could have made up a story, said he was an old friend, a colleague, someone who had dialed my number by mistake. But the truth was written all over my face, and I saw the exact second Jake realized it. His expression shifted from confusion to something worse. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew enough. Tell me the truth, Natalie. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came before something broke. And so I did the only thing I could do. I ran. Not physically, I didn't turn and bolt out the door, but emotionally, mentally, I retreated. I lowered my gaze, wrapping my arms around myself, as if I could hold in all the pieces of me that were suddenly coming undone. It's not what you think, I whispered, my voice barely holding together. Not what I think. Jake let out a sharp, humorless laugh. I just found another man's name on your phone, Natalie. A man you obviously didn't expect to call you. He stepped forward, his presence suddenly too much, and I instinctively backed up, my back pressing against the counter. His eyes flickered with something painful at my reaction. You're afraid of me now. No, Jake, it's not. My words died in my throat. Because what could I say? That I hadn't meant for this to happen? That it started as something small, something innocent? That I didn't know how to stop myself? That I didn't love him anymore, but I also never meant to hurt him? None of that mattered. None of that would make this okay. The silence stretched between us, thick, suffocating. Then Jake exhaled, raking a hand through his hair before laughing bitterly. God, I should have known. His voice cracked just a little, and the sound of it, that raw pain, made my stomach twist. You've been different for weeks. You barely look at me anymore. You barely touch me. And I was stupid enough to think it was just stress. He shook his head, looking at me as if he didn't even recognize me anymore. Tell me the truth, Natalie. Did you sleep with him? A single question. A landmine waiting to detonate. I could have lied. I could have clung to one last shred of dignity and denied it, given him something to hold on to, even if it was false. But I didn't. Because I couldn't. I looked him in the eyes and said nothing. And that was my answer. Jake sucked in a sharp breath, staggering back like I had physically hit him. For the first time, I saw tears in his eyes, and it nearly destroyed me. I did this. I took a man who loved me, a man who trusted me, and I shattered him. Jesus Christ, Natalie, he choked out. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words useless, empty, pathetic. You're sorry? He laughed again, but it was broken, hollow. That's all you have to say? I didn't know what else to say. Nothing could undo this. The silence between us stretched, unbearable, until finally, he nodded, like he had come to some inevitable decision. I can't do this, he said, voice hoarse. Jake. No. His voice hardened, any trace of the man I knew disappearing before my eyes. He stepped back, shaking his head. I need to get out of here. I can't look at you right now. And then he was gone. The front door slammed shut, and I was alone. That night, I sat in the dark, my phone in my hands, staring at the screen. One name, one number, one last choice. Ethan. Did I call him? Did I tell him what had happened? Did I run straight into his arms, into the wreckage I had created? My fingers hovered over the call button, but I didn't press it, because suddenly it wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about me. I had destroyed something that was supposed to be solid, something that was supposed to last. And the worst part, I wasn't even sure if I regretted it. Tears burned in my eyes as I dropped the phone onto the bed, pressing my hands against my face. Who the hell was I becoming? The next morning, Jake was gone. His things, his clothes, his suitcase, the framed picture of us from our first vacation together, gone. The only thing he left behind was his key, placed neatly on the kitchen counter. It was over. And yet, as I stood there, staring at that key, my mind wasn't on the man who had just walked out of my life. It was on the man who had walked into it. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't the end. Not even close. The apartment felt empty without Jake. The silence was deafening, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. His absence was everywhere, the half-empty closet, the missing toothbrush in the bathroom, the untouched side of the bed. It should have felt like a loss. It should have felt like heartbreak. But as I stood there, staring at the empty space he left behind, all I felt was relief. And that terrified me. Because what kind of person destroys something good and feels relief instead of regret? I wasn't sure I recognized myself anymore. The woman who had walked into that clinic weeks ago wasn't the same woman standing here now. That version of me had been loyal, steady, predictable, someone who would never have even considered stepping outside the lines of commitment. But somewhere along the way, that woman had cracked. And in the spaces where she had once been, someone new had taken her place. Someone who had felt restless in the life she had built. Someone who had allowed herself to want more. But more what? I sank onto the couch, staring at my phone as Ethan's name burned into the screen. The temptation was there, so easy, so simple. One call, and he would be there. I knew it. I could fall into him, let him be the distraction, the escape, the justification for everything that had led me here. But for the first time since this all started, I hesitated. Because this wasn't just about Ethan. This was about me. I had chosen this. It would be easy to say I had just fallen into it, that one thing had led to another and suddenly I was waking up in another man's bed. But the truth? I had made every single choice along the way. I had wanted this. And now I had to live with the consequences. For the first time in weeks, I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I didn't let myself reach for the thing that had caused my life to spiral. Instead, I sat with my choices, forcing myself to feel the full weight of them. Because no matter how much I wanted to rewrite the narrative, the truth was simple. I had been unhappy. And instead of facing it, I had run straight into someone else's arms. Ethan had been an escape, but he wasn't the answer. Because what if this wasn't about either of them? What if, for the first time in my life, I needed to stop defining myself by the men who wanted me? That night, I didn't cry. I didn't chase after Jake. I didn't reach for Ethan. I let the silence settle, let the loneliness creep in, and for the first time, I let myself sit in it. Because maybe that was the only way I'd ever figure out who I really was. Maybe the mistake wasn't cheating. Maybe the mistake was never questioning whether I was living the right life in the first place. And maybe it was time to finally start. What would you have done in my place? Do you believe in second chances, or is betrayal unforgivable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love gripping, real-life confessions like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because trust me, the next story? It's even more shocking. You won't want to miss it.